Damn, that was... that was good, Kadan.
A large majority of games that feature romance as part of their gameplay are arguably not sophisticated enough to have a nuanced or interesting depiction of romance. While there are various ways to integrate romance into games, the specific focus of this essay will be games that feature romance as a flavorful aside from the core gameplay, and how they are woefully inadequate or often fall flat. Using Zimmerman's modes of interactivity, various games will be analyzed in their approach of romance and how one type may be better than the other. Zimmerman describes 4 modes of narrative interactivity in his essay, written to clarify terminology that he stated was subject to misinterpretation or abuse. Of these, interactivity was one of those words which can mean everything and nothing at once. Rather than an absolute blanket definition, Zimmerman branches it into 4, suited to different results. The first mode, cognitive interactivity, focuses on the experience of the player, their psychological, emotional interaction with a text. Functional interactivity, the second mode, is a more utilitarian approach of how one interacts with structural elements such as the UI. Explicit interactivity is one that typically closer to encapsulating what players experience when playing a game. It is one that where participants, or players, interact with the text in ways that provoke a programmed response from the game. And finally, meta-interactivity is a level of interactivity outside of active participation with the text. This is the kind of interactivity that produces fan-made content, whether that be fan fiction, fan art, or shipping, the matchmaking of characters. To reconvene on the topic of romance and games, while Zimmerman notes that overlap between 4 narrative interactive modes can and do occur, explicit participation is one most appropriate to suit for the purpose of gaming. As there are 3 main ways to implement romance in games. 1. Present a linear narrative akin to the traditional forms of prose or cinema. Games that fall into this category sidestep explicit interactivity by removing the player's chance to affect the romance, and develop it independently of their actions. Its existence can be presupposed, written into the setting or background of the game's narrative, or predetermined. In Final Fantasy VIII, the turbulent teenage romance of Rinoa and Squall is central to the plot. Cynical, moody, 17-year-old boy gets hired by bubbly optimistic privileged girl to overthrow her government. Romance ensues. The romance is entirely in the province of the narrative, and has no effect on the gameplay. 2. Non-linear gameplay, offering options for the player to pursue. Perhaps championed in their current form by the likes of BioWare's games, multiple romance options have become a popular means of incorporating romance into games. Romance of this kind has become iconic when discussing their inclusion in games, given more weight by allowing player agency in who to flirt with and woo. This is the crystallization of Zimmerman's explicit interactivity, the active participation and response of player and text, according to choice. 3. Also offer multiple options, but players are incentivized with gameplay and/or narrative rewards. Of this third category there exists games such as Fallout 4, and entries of the Fire Emblem series. The incentives may or may not sway what choices to make depending on the type of player, but clearly some circumstantial variety is meant to be forced onto the player. This is all the more explicit with a game such as Fallout 4, where the Vault Dweller may romance multiple companions with no consequence. Some players may not choose to have such an open, polyamorous relationship with a reporter, ghoul, and robot-turned-android all at once, and some may choose to do so. This established, we can safely set up the category of linear romances against that of the non-linear. The first belong to that of cognitive interactivity and the latter explicit interactivity. Although qualitative judgments of romance are arguably subjective, video games, specifically those that have core gameplay not dedicated to romance, often have trouble from a fundamental starting point. In essence, most games require the protagonist to feel as an extension of the player, that is to say have presence, or immersion. Here, we use Janet Murray's definition of the word, where it is a psychologically immersive experience, a sensation of being surrounded by a completely other reality. This is all the more crucial in an experience designed to evoke strong emotions such as romantic sentiments from a player. But if there is no player customization? If they are a silent protagonist? Or just bland as possible to simulate the most broad spectrum to be as relatable as possible? The Mass Effect and Dragon Age franchises, especially those after their first iteration, seemingly presents a solution, and has established a popular paradigm since in the West. A strong character personality, with dialogue branching options to affect their demeanor. Multiple romance options to offer a range to player preference. The player is afforded a level of agency to begin developing friendships, and onto romantic ones if desired. But the critical problem is, the goal and endpoint of most relationships is the act of sex. It may be a difference of personal philosophy whether sex is the ultimate form of love. The error in assuming this will be universal, however, and mandating the sex scenes as the ultimate consolidation of a relationship seems such an oversight in a series of games that emphasizes agency. But their compulsory nature clearly shows a fixation of sex as the end goal, which seems a sentiment mirrored in the industry, a juvenile dedication to having video game sex on screen as some sort of trophy moment. Whether it be a graphic cutscene, or one which requires quick-time events. Arguably the worst kind of explicit interactivity applied to video game sex. Seriously, how does David Cage win awards? Florence from Mountains is beautifully poignant and mature take on romance, and is equally poignant in how it blends cognitive and explicit interactivity seamlessly. But it is an outlier in that it is a game dedicated to the telling of a romantic story. Stardew Valley is another stellar example, and one which rewards players' explicit interactivity well. Yet this is also a game that features friendship and romance as a significant aspect of its play. So a common element arises: AAA games that feature romance a strong feature seem to mandate cooing at naked breasts or butts on screen, the reward of flirtation and emotional investment. To defend this point, one may say it is the most cost-effective means of investing the player, in whatever misguided means to do so. However, it comes off as puerile and indicates the level of maturity in how the industry regards romantic gratification. Therefore, without dedicating it as a priority to satisfactorily illustrate romance in its narrative and gameplay, it may seem games will inherently suffer a fate of badly executed incorporation of romance in their current form. Free of resource and time constraints, meta-interactive interpretations or productions of romantic narratives can prove to be a more compelling recourse for an audience starved of good material. Pragmatically, this may be the only means to be vindicated for good romance for most franchises, as without few notable exceptions, there is a shortage of good romance in games.